We are all related, already integrated with love. We are all related, family orchestrated from above. Well, there's really only one of us, a story told in different parts, related at the heart. Every family has a maverick, the one who runs counter to the herd, and I played that role in mine. I was the one who left home and stayed away. My journey has taken me around the country and to other parts of the world, looking at issues of race and ethnicity and change and collecting people's stories from a variety of cultures and sharing them as I traveled along. Thanks to Humanities Montana, I'm sharing some of those stories with you today. I look forward to doing it person to person real soon. But for now, I wanted to just give you some highlights of what I call this race and change work and the journey and some of the stories and voices and perspectives I've been able to encounter. At the core of it, we know we are all related. But we also know that race itself is an issue that continues to divide us, whether it's by color or by class and economics or by cultural presentations in terms of religion or language. Somehow there always seems to be this division. It's part of the human story. But I take a slightly different angle on it because I'm a writer and a storyteller as well as an oral historian and a researcher. So I'm going to take you on a personal journey and look at 3 different issues that seem to come up when we're dealing with race. I've spent the last couple of decades collecting a cross-section of stories from people from various white, black, Hispanic, and Asian, and West Indian, and even West African backgrounds. The archive has over 125 oral histories now, and it's the largest of its kind and scope in the U.S. And holding these conversations, asking some of the same questions of all of these people, you get a flow of how memory works when we start to recall our experiences, especially when they come to dealing with differences. And there is something that in my research I found called nostalgic recall. Everybody talks about how wonderful it was, where they were growing up, how everybody loved each other, they never locked their doors, everything was just wonderful. And it becomes a story we tell that really gives short shrift for the reality of our experiences when it comes to dealing with race, because it's only when the new other comes into the picture that suddenly it is us versus them. So, story number 1, I decided to start looking at the area where I grew up in Florida, in segregation in the South, and taking a closer look at what that community was really all about. Here's a little bit. I'm reading from my memoir, Multicolored Memories of a Black Southern Girl. So, we grew up in the city, and it was as isolated in a lot of ways as any pockets of people who are seemingly homogeneous, whether they're Jewish or Cuban or Irish or Scandinavian from various countries, or Native American from various tribes. It's that sense that somehow we operated in the only real world. But when I looked at it a lot more closely, I realized that even as a child, I became aware of some other things that were operating. And so if any of you know anything about Southerners, when it comes to difference, the first major one we ever deal with is this. Days ahead, you could smell when a Northerner was coming to town. Pots of greens with ham hocks and neck bones instead of just fat back overflowed on some mother's stove. Hair sizzled from the gobs of grease used to straighten and curl a style that wouldn't look nappy during the relative's visit. Perspiring youngsters and their friends worked like day laborers, huddled around record players and 45s, practicing the slide, the mashed potato, and the hully-gully to prove to their teenage cousins that they were not really hicks. Now the guests arrived, usually by train, lugging gifts of clothes and kitchen appliances, and their host showed them off to neighbors like curios. I remember sitting on a porch a few doors down from our home with the grown-ups while they talked. The other little girls played hopscotch or shot marbles. I was always more interested in listening. Everything was bigger, better, and more sophisticated in Philly, D.C., Chicago, or New York, the visitors bragged while sucking on crab legs and slurping watermelon as though they were starving. They said, "The money's great, child. You can really make it up there." But most of them worked 2 or 3 jobs. They talked fast as if they had to use every word they knew, and they accented syllables that we usually drawled or dropped. But every once in a while their tongues got all tangled up and started fighting with their words. And when they split infinitives and mangled pronunciations, the neighbors caught it like players on the sidelines who had finally gotten their turn. They winked and elbowed each other, and later they gossiped and hissed, "Stuck up," and "phony child," to pump up their egos again. Well, I was born in the city in Jacksonville, Florida, and so was my mother. But behind the closed doors of our home, we had some strange little customs that didn't quite fit in with the city group that I was struggling to be a part of. I discovered this. We had some odd behaviors of our own, superstitions that we observed as part of everyday life that I didn't dare share with my city friends. As a baby, I wore a penny with a hole drilled in it, dangling around my neck to make me cut teeth. Sardine grease was rubbed on my neck to relieve the after effects of the mumps. Garlic was always in the house, not just as a spice, but as a good luck charm. If your nose itched, company was coming. Right nostril for a man, left for a woman. When your ears burned, someone was talking about you. Your right hand itched because you were getting money, and your left because you were getting mail. Dreams had to be told the next morning and then interpreted in a dream book to find the corresponding numbers that could win in the Bolita that week. The Farmer's Almanac was consulted to determine the phases of the moon before any medical help was sought. For example, no dental work when the sign of the moon was in the head, or you would either bleed profusely or certainly have a lot of pain. Once I remember straining to decipher the whispered voices of my mother and her friends in our living room, and I heard the story of a root working that was done on a woman they knew. Her legs swelled up like a balloon, one of the women said. That thing burst and maggots crawled out. I heard my mother's ominous voice say, "Child, that's stuff you don't mess with." The image was scarier to me than any horror movie, and I knew it was not a city-bred fear. I found out over time that from my mother's side of the family, they had come from South Carolina and from the Sea Islands there, and were a part of her culture called Gullahs. They spoke a patois, they had certain foods that they ate. They were ostracized in a lot of ways within the larger black community because they were considered country and had very strange folk ways. And because my mother was a city girl, she didn't really want to have any identification with that country background. But of course, later on, I discovered that those Sea Island people were also a mixture of a lot of different African tribes and cultures that had blended in to form what is known today as Gullahs or as Geechee culture. And I began to wonder if maybe there was something in that long ago tribal background where there were people who actually went from tribe to tribe sharing stories, and that somehow there was a spirit wind and it had stirred up in me, and I was the one who was going out into the world to share stories of my own, but I would have to learn how to weave them in a different way. So differences then are always a part of us, no matter where we grow up, no matter what kind of community we come from. There's no such thing as homogeneity. But we can also learn to grow with and benefit from those differences and even transform them and make them a part of what strengthens us and allows us to go out into the world and to deal with other kinds of differences. So, telling it all, remembering all of the story, that's the key to talking about race in a hopeful way. Story number 2. Well, I had to learn how to weave this background of differences on my own because I took a very different kind of journey out of that environment I told you I grew up in to become one of the first black freshmen at the University of Florida, just as integration came to this country. So I left an environment that was familiar in a lot of ways, but also diverse and tense, to go to a brand new, totally different, all-white experience. We had to live on campus for the first 2 years. There were 5 of us black freshmen out of 18,000 students. There were maybe a total of 35 students of color of any background, and that included foreign students, and that included graduate students and people who were not living on campus. But imagine that, coming from one world of one seemingly alike group of people, and then becoming totally immersed in a different world. So we had to live on campus for 2 years. That meant curfews and having to learn for the first time what it was like to encounter and be around people who were different and learn how they live and how they talk and how they interact, and also going to classes and walking around the campus and having that sense of needing to have a wall around me in order to move and function and begin to find my way. It wasn't the first time I'd had an encounter with someone who was white, but it was the first time I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time and really begin to learn about them. So I began to get comfortable enough so that by the second year I was on campus. I was a big sister writing over the summer to a young lady who was going to be coming into the dorm to let her know what to expect. And she came and I showed her around, and over the months we began to get friendly, and to just talk and tease each other and learn about each other and the differences in cultures, and how she shaved her legs and I had no hair and didn't, and if you were black and you had hair on your legs it was good and you wouldn't want to shave anyway. But one night, I remember she told me, she said, you know, I want to tell you, when I got to campus and I saw you were my big sister, I was so upset, and I said, why me? And, you know, I was just really put off by it. And you asked me to go out to dinner that night, you know, with a group of people, maybe pizza or something. And she said, I was ashamed to be seen with you. I was embarrassed. She said, I didn't go. And she said, I want to tell you that I don't feel that way anymore. I was not embarrassed. I would go with you anywhere. And it was that first realization that even when we begin to move into a new environment and start to find our way in a different culture or racial atmosphere, there's always going to be that gap, that space in terms of how you are interacting and how the other person may be receiving you. I saw no gap, but she did. But I was also aware she was trying to tell me that she had changed and how powerful our stories of change are. So this story then about race in the U.S. is also about moving forward. It's not just being stuck in the pain, but it's how we move forward in those moments when we have the choice. So that interest in how we move forward and how moving forward changes over time led me to start interviewing not just people who are, we would consider elders, but also younger people, and to begin to bring their voices into the story of race and how they're experiencing it, and what some of the other dynamics are that maybe we aren't even aware of sometimes. So in this video clip from one of the television documentaries I did, I want you to hear three younger people talking about their perspectives on race.
So, do you think there are still racial problems today?
Some white people may feel a sort of supremacy or maybe a little bit higher status than maybe other races. And I've never viewed myself like that, but you know, I can tell from some situations that maybe I was perceived that way. Rather than trying to come together and find something that bonds us all, it's more just trying to build up an individual race as one rather than, you know, coming together.
Do you have interracial friendships and relationships?
I'm actually in an interracial relationship right now, currently.
And how is that being accepted or received?
Fine, I haven't really encounter with too much problems. You know, some people feel that maybe it's going to be a burden on me because it's not as widely accepted as maybe it should be. But I feel that it's only an issue if you make it an issue. Maybe I can somewhat set an example and show that it's okay to have a more open-minded opinion or approach to situations, because it's not going to hurt anything by broadening, you know, that perspective and I guess trying to figure out where that opinion comes from. You know, why do you feel that way? Is there a legitimate reason, or it's just something that you've been taught or other people have told you? We as a generation now, we need to start taking upon the change in ourselves and not just, you know, and making more rules of equality or, you know, more rules of giving everyone opportunity. It needs to be rules of ourselves and knowing that we're all humans. You know, we all came into this world the same way, no matter what you believe, and we're all going to leave the same way. So, I mean, I hope that one day it really does change for real, but right now it just seems like more of a development rather than an actual change.
I was probably like 4 years old at my grandfather's house in North Carolina, and I was watching the show Different Strokes, which is about two black children that are raised in a white family. I used to love the show, and I was watching it. My grandfather came in and he got real angry and said, "Turn off that show with them damn colored folks. That's not allowed in this household." And at that age, I didn't really know what was wrong with it. Mr. Douthat was the school janitor at our school, and he was the nicest, most loving guy in the world. All the kids loved him. We all adored him. And he lived on Settlement Road, which was very close to my house. It was a very poor road, dirt road, and it's where some black people lived. And I just remember just the big difference between that, like how he could go to school, how everybody could love him and stuff, and then yet they were living down there and they were almost shunned to an extent by my parents and by other people. When I was young, I was probably in first or second grade, and I wanted to have every one of my friends, and he was going to come over for a sleepover, and I told my mom that he was black, and it wasn't allowed. It took me years to actually figure that one out. I think everybody in my family would say that they're not racist. However, you can hear the racist remarks in a very subtle, slight way. I feel like I can try to teach them as best as I can, but you can't teach a person any of this stuff. They've really got to come to these awarenesses on their own. Now, they will deny, my brothers, my dad will deny up and down that they're not racist, yet they'll let the N-word slip out here and there, and it's like, well, how can you say that? Listen to the way you're talking. Therein lies the racism that's embedded within people. It's like the sins of the fathers get passed on to the children.
So how do you break the cycle?
Just make different choices. You flat out make different choices with people. You just make different choices.
To be honest, in Jamaica, we don't really have that whole issue of race. It's more like a class difference. So I wasn't quite fully aware of the whole, I am black, you're white, you're whatever. Until I went to undergrad at Fisk University, and I remember one of our first classes in African American literature, our professor said, how does it feel every morning to be reminded that you're black? And it never occurred to me because I don't think I ever was reminded that I was black in Jamaica. That kind of school at a black college or university, you tend to get like overly indulged into the whole issue. I couldn't understand it at first. I was in classes and everyone was so passionate about overcoming racial barriers and obstacles, and I just didn't get it. And I remember some of my other friends from the Caribbean, we just didn't get it. In Jamaica, the prime minister is black, all the lawyers, the doctors, the bank people, everyone looks more or less like me, just maybe a different shade. When I came, I automatically realized that there was some tension, I think, between African Americans and West Indian blacks. And I remember a couple of our professors would talk about that constantly. And so I didn't know how to approach African Americans because I just didn't feel like they would accept us because we didn't have the same passion about racial issues as they did, especially at Fisk University. So at first, I think it was very difficult for us to understand each other. We were like, get over it already. And they were like, what? You don't understand. And so it was hard at first, and I think that still exists even in the older community where you find that there's a tension between the West Indian blacks who are just about over it and African Americans who think that we think we're better than them. I think it's easier to have relationships with whites because when we don't have that attitude of inferiority. Like I said, I never grew up not thinking I could be the next prime ministeress of Jamaica or a lawyer or a doctor or whatever it was. There was no obstacle, nothing stopping me. So I grew up where everyone was just about the same. Our motto in Jamaica is out of many, one people. And I really grew up with that mentality. So I approached everyone, white, African American, Hispanic, with the same amount of respect that I wanted them to treat me with. So developing relationships, and some of my closest friends are white now, so I don't think I had that much of a difficulty, or most of my family or relatives had difficulty getting into relationships with whites.
The point is, this is a different generation with different experiences, eh?
I think my generation is more accepting of diversity and variety, and I think for that reason the racial attitudes aren't as pronounced and distinct as they were. It may be there underlying, somehow hidden. I don't believe it's gone, but I think in our generation we're more willing to overlook some of those racial barriers. The fact that we'll get more information about the different races and the different ethnicities, it has helped to reduce that ignorance of I don't know, so I am afraid.
My experience with race, or having to define my race as a mixed person, really started when I moved to the U.S. When I came here, it started, I think, when I was filling out applications for college. And every single form asked, what race are you? And I found that very difficult because I have a lot of races in me, and so I didn't know if I should check each box, or my box didn't seem to be on the form. And so that was the first time when I really questioned, well, what race am I? You know, and I kind of decided that, well, I'm of mixed race, which a lot of people don't seem to identify with. My grandmother she's deceased, from China, and her husband, she married a black maroon from Jamaica. And so my father is mixed in that sense, where he's half Chinese, half black. And my mother is also mixed. She is Portuguese, Cherokee Indian, black, and Scottish. I'm not just black, I'm not just Cherokee, you know, I'm all of those things. Black people want to define me as black, and I seem to have a problem with that, not because I don't like black people, because I am partially black, but because I feel that defining myself as such is ignoring all the other parts of me, and I have a problem with that. White people, they don't see me as white, obviously not, because I don't fit those features, but I don't know, when they try and ask me what I am, it's because they think I look exotic to them. And so if I tell them I have white in them, they're a little surprised. But I think they're probably a little bit more understanding for some reason, I think. Not sure quite why, but they are. My mom has less black in me than I do, and she considers herself black, if you ask her. And she has a problem with the fact that I don't identify myself as black. She thinks it's absurd, which is very funny. She looks more Cherokee than I do. My dad, I've never really spoken to him. It's weird. He has my complexion, but he has very slant eyes because of his mom. So I've really never spoken to him about it, but I know it's an issue of contention with my mom because she has a problem with how I define my race. My mom's reaction to how she defines herself might be from her mom's experience, because her mom was Scottish and Cherokee, but growing up in the South, she's from North Carolina, she had to hide the fact that she had Cherokee in her because she wanted to pass as white. And so if anybody found out that she wasn't pure white, then she'd be black, even though she didn't have black in her. In those days, if you had anything else but white, you were black. And so that's probably why my mom defines herself as black, because she has black in her, so she's just black. So I think there is a generational difference.
So, story number 3, it's a little shorter and a little more current. I went to an event staged by an organization that was trying to bring people together who are working on social justice and race and ethnic relations issues. But I was intrigued by these 2 women I heard singing and doing a presentation, and at the end of it they said, "We are all family, cousins, 52 times removed." So we're all cousins, related, 52 times removed. And that stuck with me because I was thinking, if we're all cousins and if we're all related, then that means that as human beings, we're just the original dysfunctional family, acting like wounded children, fussing with each other and fighting, but there's no way we can rid ourselves of each other. So we have to realize that in order to move forward, we need people who are willing to take the risk and go through the gap and extend themselves to other cultures in order to learn and bring back the information. But isn't it interesting that every culture has a negative name for people who do that? For me, I was called an Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside. Then when I was doing workshops, this Hispanic friend of mine, he said, "Oh yeah, coconut, brown on the outside, white on the inside." Then, as I was collecting oral histories, there was this Chinese American man who grew up in Jacksonville around the same time I did, sharing his story. He said, "Oh yeah, banana. Yellow on the outside, white on the inside." And as I've traveled in Montana, as I married a Montanan, and I've gone around the state, and I'm beginning to be introduced and to learn more about the native cultures here, Native Americans here. I've heard apple, red on the outside, white on the inside. So there's this pushback, no question about it, but the rewards are so great. And when I go around and do presentations, and I do music, and I do video, I play audio, I let you listen to more young people, I share with young people wherever I am, bring people together across generations. They're hungry for the stories of the times when we break free from our conditioning in order to open ourselves up to a bigger world. And they want to know how we do it. I look forward to sharing more of those stories when we do meet. I hope that you will go on the web and look at some of the multimedia materials there and enjoy some of the videos and some of the radio programs. And you keep sharing your story, and I'll keep sharing mine. Yes, there's really only one of us, one story in different parts, together at the heart.